Well, our top focus, the White House is pressuring Congress to pass stalled legislation to support Ukraine's war against Russia. Now, at the same time, policymakers are weighing the consequences of using $300 billion in Russian assets to help Kyiv's war effort. Now, after the invasion of Ukraine, the United States, along with Europe and Japan, imposed sanctions to freeze the assets, denying Russia access to its international reserves. Very little of the Russian assets, perhaps $5 billion or so, by some estimates, are in the hands of US institutions. But a significant chunk of Russia's foreign reserves are held in US dollars, both in the United States and in Europe. The United States has the power to police transactions involving its currency and use its sanctions to immobilize dollar-denominated assets. Now, as the Biden administration has begun taking another look at whether it can use its existing authorities or if it should seek congressional action to use the funds. Now, factions of Congress have previously tried to attach provisions to the annual defense bill, allowing the Justice Department to seize Russian assets and funnel the sale proceeds to Ukraine to help pay for weapons. But the efforts were delayed amid concerns that the proposals were not thoroughly vetted. Last week, Brussels proposed hiving off profits earned from frozen Russian assets, a step towards sending funds worth billions of euros to Ukraine, that is. The EU has frozen some 200 billion euros of Russian central bank assets for its Ukraine invasion. The Belgium-based international deposit organization Euroclear holds about 90% of those funds. The Biden administration is also pressing Britain, France, Germany, Italy, Canada and Japan to come up with a strategy by February 24th. That is also the second anniversary of the invasion. But now, with Ukraine running low on funds and ammunitions and the war potentially moving into the third year, the debate about how to provide more aid could shift from a legal question to a moral one. Apart from weapons and ammunitions, Ukraine is now asking men between 25 and 60 who have left the country to return for military service. The Ukrainian military said it wants to immobilize up to 500,000 more soldiers to defend the country. Now, this also comes as the country is struggling to keep combat-age men from fleeing. When the war began in February of 2022, the average Ukrainian soldier was between 30 and 35 years old. Now, the average age is older than 40. Well, for more on this story that we are tracking at this hour, we are now joined by James Jackson, who is a journalist and a political analyst. Welcome to the show, James. Well, my first question to you is regarding the use of Russian assets in the war effort. Now, do tell us, is this a possibility? And if so, how, according to you, is this going to happen?
I think it's a possibility, but it's going to be very difficult. And because of ultimately, the Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen has said that this isn't legally permissible in the United States as it stands to use confiscated funds and to put them into the Ukrainian war effort. That means that if they wanted to, they would probably have to pass it through Congress or face a steep legal challenge. And as we've seen recently, one of the big problems in Congress is a deadlock in support for Ukraine, particularly in the Republican-controlled House of Representatives. So what Ukraine is seeing is actually a wide range of legal and political deadlocks in terms of support and funding for their war effort. We were not going to see any more funding for Ukraine this year, as both the EU Parliament and the US houses have closed for the year amid infighting now in the US. That's come mostly from the hardline Republicans, some of whom are opposed to Ukraine, whereas in the EU that's come through Putin's ally, Viktor Orban, the Prime Minister of Hungary. And so Germany, as well as EU nations have looked at these Russian assets that have been stranded, often in US dollars or euros, and said maybe we can use those for Ukraine or even for our own budgets. Germany has said with about 720 million euros worth of Russian funds. But the thing is, it's not that simple. You can't just because you have sanctions on a country doesn't mean that you can you can stop them from moving around that money. That doesn't necessarily mean that you can spend it for yourself. And that might set a worrying precedent, because what might Russia do in retaliation? What might other hostile states do in retaliation? So it's something that needs to be carefully thought about. And it is a huge risk. And as I think we're seeing, there's not that much appetite for risk in Western capitals at the moment.
Right. And James, talking about Ukraine, well, the country is also running low on arms and ammunition. What option does Kyiv have for further arms procurement here?
I think Kyiv needs to be patient, ultimately, because, yes, we have seen a deadlock in recent months, but then we do still see a lot of will from the United States and from almost all European member states. So when Viktor Orban blocked that 50 billion funding for Ukraine in recent months from the EU, just under a week ago, the way the EU responded was saying, we are determined to fund, and we'll even do 26 bilateral agreements if we have to. But of course, that could also be a sign of negotiating strength to intimidate Orban or to show that they're not going to back down easily. So I think Ukraine are trying to build as much as they can at home, including there's new plans to build 1 million drones, first-person controllable drones, which we've seen are extremely useful weapons within this war, especially in the type of trench warfare that it's turned into, especially in the east and south. But what we've seen in recent months is that Ukraine will need to be patient. The EU and US are still determined to fund, but it's going to take a bit more time because of hostile allies. Of course, there is one big risk, and that is Donald Trump being re-elected. And in that case, then it's all to play for in terms of US support, and the EU might have to step up even more.
Okay, thank you so much, James. Ukraine needs to be patient, you say.